itchiness is such a huge topic. I mean, we know what it feels like to be itchy and how annoying that is. And of course, with our dogs, with their coats, all kinds of things happen there. And we can really overthink it. It can be really, really complicated, but it can also be really simple.
Welcome to the Absolute Dog Sexier and Squirrel Podcast. I'm Lauren Langman. I'm one of the world's leading dog trainers, and it's my mission to help owners become their dog's top priority. In each episode, you'll discover how to gain trust and communicate with your dog like never before, creating unbreakable bonds that make you the most exciting part of their world. Welcome to the Sexier and Squirrel Podcast, the podcast that gives you real life dog training and sometimes human results too. I'm joined by the wonderful Amanda Glickman, and Amanda and I are going to be talking itchy dogs, dogs with skin problems, dogs that generally want to scratch, dogs that cause themselves hassle, dogs that find themselves in a bit of an itchy situation. So welcome, Amanda. I'm really pleased you're here. Tell me more.
Well, thank you so much, Lauren. I love being here. I love chatting with you. And I love when we can put our brains together and think these things through because itchiness is such a huge topic. I mean, we know what it feels like to be itchy and how annoying that is. And of course, with our dogs, with their coats, all kinds of things happen there. And we can really overthink it. It can be really, really complicated, but it can also be really simple. So
I might start with going through a case study for you, because I think case studies can be quite helpful. And just as we were talking about them not taking this, she's now on my slippers. She's eating my slippers as we speak. She was like, those are my, no, you're not, Tokyo, you've never taken my slippers yet. Please don't take my slippers. So they are making me giggle. So yeah, I think a young, like 2-year-old Cocker Spaniel started with having like funny skin episodes, like pad episodes, and just funny skin, like annoying skin. And we tried elimination diet. And then we went on to like a balm to put on the treatment area, management in terms of not letting her get wet and get sort of irritated, and definitely not walking in the wet if we could help it. Always blasting her pads off. So always making sure the pads are blasted or dried, but generally a lot of management. And then down the sort of immunotherapy routes, and then just being very careful on what she eats and what herbs she has effectively. So what herbs she has to support her internally. So really a bit of a mission on skin. Tell me what you think, and tell me what you know, and tell me what you found out, because whilst I think we can manage some of these conditions for some people are really long lasting and they are for life. And actually that can be quite sad for a lot of dogs and a lot of people, really.
well, and a lot of it is also our perception of it. I mean, so let's just start with what is itchiness related to? It's related to the skin. And the skin, of course, is the largest organ. We often forget that the skin actually is an organ in and of itself. But here's a really cool thing. If we take a look at embryology, which is basically how we become from a single cell into what we are, there's actually a phase where you can think about a donut where the outside becomes the inside. So our skin is related to our GI tract in a funny kind of way. Because I often have people ask me, why do food allergies show up as skin allergies? And there is that relationship. And the immune system is a really, really interesting system altogether. And so when we talk about itchiness, we can have itchiness as a result of food allergies, of environmental allergies, things like pollens and dusts.
Dust.
Dust is a big one.
I was
Pollen
very
now,
insulted. I was very insulted when I heard that dust was on my dog's radar, because I was like, what are they trying to say about my house? What are they trying to say? And they were like, no, it's not to do with cleanliness. Because
no,
you're
and
like, do I need to dust more?
it gets better than that because in the dust there's mites. So
I
I
know.
could really coot
Horrified.
you out here, but we won't.
Horrified.
But
Horrified.
so we have, environmental contaminants as well, such as chemical things. We've got biologicals. So we have parasites, bacteria, fungi. We often forget about things like molds. Molds can be a big problem. But most of these things actually do relate back to the immune system, because what is an allergy? An allergy is basically the immune system that's gone a bit sideways. But another important thing to think about, you mentioned a few cases where people are struggling with this the entire life of their dogs. there is a genetic component as well. So it can run in certain lines. And that's because the immune system is relayed genetically. If we want to take a quick look at what the immune system is, real quick look, think about it as a surveillance system. So we have cells in our body which will pick up something that it's worried about. And you can think about this, for example, the police. They're tracking down a criminal. They have a photograph, but they only have a photograph of the side of the person's face, not the whole deal. And so what can happen with an allergy is we have our little surveillance system. We have our little police officers, if you will, or our military, depending on how far you want to go with this. And they have this information and they're passing it around themselves, but it's not always the full story. And so sometimes they misidentify something and then they put up an immune response in order to defend. And it gets a bit out of control, but it's based on misinformation because that piece of pollen is not actually going to hurt us, but our immune system thinks it will because it goes into overdrive. So stepping back and thinking about this from a practical method, it really does become a process of elimination. So you talk about elimination diets, very important because we want to try and identify what it is if we think that it's a dietary source. The first thing really to do when you have an itchy problem is to start with just, as you know, wiping your dog down. Like the Gleam towels that you get at AOK9 are amazing for that.
I
Yeah.
agree that gleams are fantastic because you get them damp. You can get them on the AOK9 store. You have them damp, and we brought them out for lots of different reasons, but one of them was for allergies. So you can wipe your dog down after a walk where you've been in the woodland or you've been on the beach or you've been out and about, but actually you can wipe them down. So you're not only maybe keeping them clean, but you're also actually helping with allergies.
Yeah, and the nice thing about the Gleam towels is they're not fluffy. They don't leave anything behind. So they're a nice, smooth way of just picking stuff up. I like to think of them as a magnet because they're kind of like a magnet for picking up all that dust and pollen, all those potential allergens that your dog picks up. So that's the number one thing. I know there are some people who go out and they wash their dogs and they wash their dogs and they give them baths. The problem with that is that in the skin, there are little glands called sebaceous glands, and they actually release an oil, which is really important for protecting the skin. So when you were talking about putting balms on your dog's feet and on their sores, we're trying to make up for the loss of those oils. And so that's why sometimes those sort of treatments are actually helpful. It depends on the situation. It depends on the dog. But if we overwash our dogs, we actually remove those oils and we dry out the skin. And so that can be a problem. So coming back to when we're dealing with an itchiness problem, we want to wipe our dogs down versus wash them down all the time. Obviously,
such a good point, isn't it? And it's funny, when I went to the skin specialist, I've been to the skin specialist a couple of times, and that's one of the things she said to me to do. And she hadn't heard of the Gleam towel, but one of the things she said to me to do. And the other was she actually recommended a balm that was in the USA, but was very hard to import, which is why we came out with Soothie, because it was very difficult for us to get it here. We were waiting like 4 or 5 months, which was silly. But exactly the same thing, because there's lots of different prongs you can go in on, and you don't necessarily want to do them all at once. You actually want to try and stage them a little bit, don't you? You want to kind of try one thing.
That is really, really important. Really important is you start out with, you can put yourself together a little protocol. For example, start by wiping your dog down and then take a look at the allergens that are in your environment. Take a look at the chemicals that are in your environment. We'll talk about that one in a second. And then take a look at your diet. Of course, you want to, if you can, work with a vet with this. Sometimes some things will be really obvious. I mean, I'm a kid who grew up, I was allergic to everything. I was adopted. I had basically no immune system when I came into my new family. My parents were medical professionals, my mother a nurse, my father a pathologist. I was basically a ball of eczema and I was almost killed by a banana because I went into anaphylaxis. So the interesting thing about how they solved that problem was they threw me in the dirt because their philosophy was build up the immune system. And so this is why we want to be kind of careful. We don't want to isolate our dogs from the world, but we can do things, mitigate by doing things like the wiping them down, watching what's in the environment, making sure that they're not in areas which have high chemical contamination. That is a big one, obviously. Because again, it can damage the skin. And as soon as you start that process of there's some damage to the skin, you've opened up the opportunity for things to get in there, for your immune system to basically go nuts and say, oh my gosh, alert, alert. We're going to go into full surveillance. And then it starts acting on
And that's
everything.
exactly it, isn't it? Something little happens, like a minor graze or an abrasion, or I don't know, they get a little sore, and that's it. It can just blow from there, can't it? Once you've got a dog that's almost predisposed to being like that. And I think
Yeah.
we've got to accept there's that predisposition for some dogs, right?
Yeah. 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 And, so much, if you've got puppies, again, it's a really important thing to vary and expose in a controlled kind of way. Once again, if we overly sterilize the environment, they don't develop a proper immune system. But being able to get them to be in safe environments, exposed to things, changing their diet around, exposing them to different foods. Like, I so love the fresh food diets and baking that Michelle does with Devon Dogs and with AOK9, because that is a brilliant way to introduce your dog to various potential allergens in a safe and fun way. Because by exposing them to fresh foods, you're giving them all kinds of really important antioxidants and anti-inflammatory compounds in a natural way. And these both help to really boost the immune system, because it takes away things that can be damaging or things that your immune system can be reactive to.
And it's
So
massive. It's massive, and it's colourful. And like you said, it's fun. You're feeding the rainbow. You're doing it at such a low level that it's kind of like harmless and yet meaningful. And I love
yeah,
the idea of harmless and meaningful at the same time. Like it really can't do much harm, and it's meaningful in so many ways. So I so agree, and I'm so passionate about it.
yeah, yeah. Well, to give an example, this morning, Murphy actually had a a bit of bacon and a little bit of egg that was left over from our breakfast, stuffed into a topple with a few other things. And this is the other thing I love, is the layering of it. And so it's not just, dogs like variety. So it's not just bland kibble. They're getting, so, and there might be some kibble in there, but they're getting that layering.
They're
And
meant
what,
to scavenge. They are meant to
yes,
scavenge, right? They are
yes.
meant to be. I caught one of mine the other day, and I know we're digressing, and we'll get back to itching in a minute. But literally, she grabbed hold of. She was in a corner of a bit of woodland, and she's like ravenously eating. And I'm like, what has she got? I'm thinking she's caught some sort of dead bird or something. She's like pulling the sticky weed, and she's
Oh
grabbing the sticky weed, and she's loving the
my
sticky.
God.
Never seen a dog so happy about sticky weed. She's covered in it. She's eating it. She's eating it off her body. Like amazing, amazing, and so funny. Like so
That
funny.
is
But that's it, right?
fantastic. That,
Dogs, they know.
well, you know what they do. Dogs who have lived a enriched life do. And that's the important thing. Once again, is making sure that we have dogs that do live enriched lives, because when they don't have the ability to figure things out, sometimes that's when you do have the dog that's eating the wrong mushroom or whatever. But bringing us back to topic here, just to give a little bit more organization, because I do actually have some notes here. And I have as my primary causes for itchiness, allergies, so immune response, which we've been talking about. That can be topical, it can be food, it can be environmental. We have skin irritation, like dermatitis. That's often chemical or biological, so fungal, bacterial, viral. Parasites,
Mm,
right? Fleas, ticks, and mites. I was just down in Oregon, as you know, visiting the amazing Anne McGloon. Absolutely amazing Anne McGloon. But
brilliant.
down in Oregon, we were doing some field dog work, and the ticks were crazy. Like, they were crazy. So I was really glad to have my dogs, or have Harley, on Bug K9, because I swear that definitely helps. And you always have to be careful what you say, but I think that was probably instrumental in helping him with his Giardia infection that he had last year.
Wow.
So that comes back to the whole nutrition element. Stress, massive, massive contributor to itchiness. So dogs with full buckets. If you have a new dog in the house, my Labrador, my trusty, wonderful Labrador Salty dog, actually got quite stressed when Murphy arrived. New dog in the house, crazy terrier. And so he actually started itching and chewing. And so he actually
It's
created,
common, isn't it? It's common. And
yep.
even if you think to people, like I hate to think of this example because it does upset me a bit, but I have an uncle and he lives alone, and my nan passed away a few years ago. And since then he's had horrible eczema and he itches. So he
Yeah.
itches and he sits there and he itches. And he's only done it since she went, like, and he sits there and he just itches and itches and itches and annoys himself, and it's just horrible. It's
Yeah,
horrible.
and you think about it too, though, back to things like abnormal repetitive behaviors, because that's what it can become. When you do something when you're stressed, it becomes what you do when you're stressed, right?
Mm,
So this comes back to what we were talking about, things like enrichment activities with the food, back to the bake-offs. Once again, it may not seem related. It's totally related by giving our dogs activities. You told me recently when I was working with some problems with Harley's new sport of shadow chasing, chew, 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 watching you put coconut oil
chewing,
on weird things, and it's kind of like
chewing,
all
chewing.
of a sudden he's like, oh, I've got something to do.
Chewing, chewing.
Chewing.
Like I watch both of these two, and when I get on a podcast, they wanted to run around, and both of them grab. They've got soft toys, but both of them go to grab their soft toys. So one's on the bed there that he grabbed, and the other one's down by her where she grabbed. And they both grabbed a soft toy because they don't have a bone in the living room, but they do have antlers. But they both grabbed their soft toy because when I go into a podcast mode, they hear my voice change and they hear that's not like how I talk around the house necessarily. And so because you're energetic in a different way to maybe how you're just like, would you like pasta? It's not like, would you like pasta? And so you know what, it's a slightly different voice. And when they hear that, they can get a little bit like run aroundy, like she's doing it now. And what she'll do is she'll go to grab the toy to almost self-soothe. So there's a
Yeah.
level of self-soothing going on there because actually that's her way. And she's an 8-year-old dog, but that's her way of saying, you know what, this is how I manage myself. Chewing for me is such a fantastic thing, whether it's like a long lasting soft toy style, they're hard soft toys,
Yeah.
or whether it is a chew or a bone, like so fantastic. And I so agree, Amanda, when it comes to dogs who might do, it's almost a replacement activity. It's a replacement
It
activity.
is. It is. And over time, I'm just moving my camera over so Lauren can see Murphy passed out now after his little romping around. But this is the result of chewing. He is a
Mm.
big, big chewer, little dog, big chewing. But what he's learned now is that when I'm on with you, for example, he roots around a bit and he's kind of like, no, okay, I'm done. But that all started through chewing, right? Through chewing various things. He would calm himself down. And once he'd get himself to the stage where he could relax, he would then just put himself to sleep. And that is a great alternative to the itchiness. Because when you
Absolutely.
think about it from the abnormal repetitive behavior, that's a mouthful. From that perspective, it's that habit. It's like us chewing our fingernails. You get stressed, then you're doing something like you've got an itch, and then that just becomes your go-to behavior. You make that relationship. I don't know what to do, so I'm going to itch. I'm feeling stressed out, so I'm going to itch. And so massive, massive element there. Genetic predisposition, we mentioned already, some breeds are more susceptible. And so when we are choosing our dogs, or if we're adopting a dog, it's really important to take a look at the background so that we can help to mitigate. Because there's a genetic predisposition does not mean that it's a permanent problem. It means that there are things that we can do to try to mitigate, right? And so, again, activities, making sure that they have minimal irritants in their environment, or that you're able to wipe them down after a walk. They might have their own space. One of the problems, moving my camera again, you see I have carpet in the space. I also have a couch. You might want to have an environment which is hypoallergenic. In other words, you have a rubberized floor, or a floor which is not super slippery, but easy to wash down. And have furniture in there that does not involve upholstery like my couch here. So all kinds of things you can do in your environment that way. Houses these days are being built smarter and smarter. So when you have your house dog, or if you happen to have allergies yourself, we don't have these houses which are loaded with things that attract and hold allergens the way that we did back in the 70s, when we used to have that brocade wallpaper, at least here in North America, which was fuzzy. And it was like ridiculous. But just think about the things that were crawling around in there. It's kind of disgusting. But my final thing was about dry skin. And so that comes back to, maybe bathing our dogs a little too much, or them being in an environment with too much air conditioning, or too much heating, too much dryness going on, chemicals, when we clean sores on ourselves, for example, we'll often use rubbing alcohol. When I was working in animal health, before we ever gave injections, we used rubbing alcohol. I actually decided that this was a bad thing. I did some research on it. It's not a great thing because you actually emulsify the stuff in the skin, which sometimes means you're injecting it. And also you're drying the skin out, which means now you have a point of irritation, right? So little things like that can be massive. Aging can also be an issue because as our dogs age, the sebaceous glands lose function. And you'll often see with aging dogs, their skin gets really kind of dry and flaky. And so once again, it's about potential dietary things you can do. This is still open for argument. It's open for debate. But there's some suggestion that increasing omega-3s and omega-6 fatty acids in the diet could be beneficial. And science is always behind, unfortunately, from what we experience, because we have a mass of knowledge out there in the dog world. And everyone has a bunch of experiences, but in order to do the research, in order to really determine what's going on, it's expensive, B, it's time consuming. And so it always lags behind what we're experiencing. Adding omega-3s and omega-6s to your dog's diet isn't going to hurt. It could provide some benefits because
we have a very exciting new omega supplement on AO Canine. So your timing is great on that one. And like I said, I cannot say that it, I think we've got to be careful to say this makes a big difference. I think what we say is it cannot do any harm. And I think my dog's coats look fantastic and their skin looks better. And at the same time, we're doing lots of things. So you never quite know. Like I do add, I mean, a few of the things I do, Amanda, I do add not loads of fish, but some fish to my dog's diet. Because I think natural, like where you can is great. So they do have some fish as treats or as part of the day. I do add my omega oil, Shine Canine. So it's a really, really nice way to just skin and coat. So great for skin and coat. Mine do have our new itchy dog supplement as well. Again, I think the big thing is there's lots of sort of things you can use out there, Cytopoint, Apoquel, all of the things. But for my dog, Cytopoint became something that we had no response to it. So we were paying £60 a month and having no response. And Apoquel, for some dogs who don't like to take tablets, or for some dogs who struggle to get things inside them, can be stressful. But also, again, sometimes you get no response. So you get no response on it. And it's long term. And I feel like, you know what, we could do things differently.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I've used Apoquel with Salty Dog and with success. It worked for him. And we have to remember that there's massive genetic variation, right? And when we get into pharmaceuticals have a tremendous value. But again, whenever you're taking something, your body's always working on something called homeostasis. It's trying to create a balance. And when we add something that may not be normally at those levels, we sometimes upset that balance. And so we have to be careful. That's why we have veterinarians, right? And we look to veterinarians because they're up to date with the research. They know what's going on. But from a day-to-day perspective, personally, I always like to take a look around what's in my environment, what I can utilize in my environment. Coming back to things like ticks and fleas, again, when I was at the amazing Anne McLuhan's place, and it was amazing, she has rosemary everywhere. I mean, I'm talking the dogs are running through the rosemary.
Wow.
Things like that really excite me because that is something that is in the environment. It's the dogs are accustomed to it. They've grown up in that environment. So, chances of an allergic response are low. We know it deters parasites like fleas and ticks. And it's just there. The dogs are basically self-medicating by running through the road.
Fantastic.
Smells fantastic.
Fantastic.
And of course, coming back to the topic of itchiness, a lot of dogs have allergies to the saliva of fleas and ticks. And so mitigating and minimizing that really helps them. Once you get into that inflammatory response, whether it be,
you're in trouble when you're in that.
It's a cascade. It is physically a chemical cascade, which results in all kinds of things. And it can be really difficult to control when it's getting out of whack.
It's hard to put a lid back on it. And I mean, my protocol for my dogs, and I think that it's worth saying because I have had an allergy struggle with dust mites, house mites, and every other mite, which I was very offended by. And our protocol would be on typical days. So on typical days, we're careful on diet. So we're careful on our diet and we're aware of our diet and we're aware of what she has. And then in addition to that, we are very careful not to allow her to get abrasions or like say run on the AstroTurf where it can actually be quite abrasive. So we're careful not to do too much of that. But then we also have like a protocol when we come into a problem area, like a care period, like where we really need to care. And that would be damp. Like if she goes and hers is on a pads. So it would be like when we're damp, we're a little bit careful not to allow it to get really damp. She does take a supplement. So she takes our AOK9 supplement for skin. She is on omega-3s, 6, 9s. And she's also a dog who, if she does have wet pads, we blast them all off. So we blast it all off. So we don't let her go in with wet pads. We do wipe her down with her Gleam. And if we're going to add anything to it, it would be apple cider vinegar. So we'll use like an apple cider vinegar. It doesn't smell so great maybe, but you know what? It seems to keep her any problems at bay. And it does save us from having real episodes. And I do think there are those real episodes. So when they do have it, it can be a real episode and that can be a nightmare to look after. So it's better to keep it at bay.
Yeah, no, absolutely, absolutely. You know, and coming back to my own personal experience in my own life, right? Being a adopted baby at 6 months of age, I was a formula baby. I was brought up on Similac or something like that. So I did not develop the immune system I would have developed from my mother, which meant that everything I was exposed to was novel to my body, and so it responded to it. And again, I'm grateful to my parents. Instead of, you know, sterilizing the snot out of everything, my mom just basically phased in, you're going to have this, we're going to throw you into that, you know, you're just going to play with, and we had dogs, and dogs are amazing because again, you know, they love us, they like to hang out with us, they can be a source of allergens for us, but we know in studies that kids who grow up with dogs tend to have better immune systems than those who don't, just because that proximity being with them all the time. But yeah, I mean, it's every case is individual, but you know, your key things, as I said, always confer with your vet. Depends on the cause. Seasonal allergies, wipe them down with a damp cloth. In the winter, like your point about blasting off the paws, mold is a very serious problem up here where I am because we are wet and wild on the west coast of Canada here. Be aware of your parasites. Make sure that you do what you can to try and mitigate. Watch the stress and be aware of the diet, being aware of the diet. And you know how hydrolyzed diets work. And I just want to throw this in here because not everyone does. What is a hydrolyzed diet? It's basically, it takes some of the key components of the diet and it breaks them down into small, small pieces. You can think of it like Lego, right? You have the big structure. Well, we're going to break it down into its chemical components because there's a less likely to develop an immunological reaction to it. So that's what hydrolyzed diets are all about. You get your dog on a hydrolyzed diet, and then you add in each component carefully, chicken or turkey or whatever, to find out what that problem is. And it is interesting, like if you want to go into the geekiness of it, the whole immune system is absolutely fascinating, and the way that our body responds. You know, it's yeah, the more I learn about it, the more I'm amazed I am.
And how about so our specialist recommended a single source protein that we hadn't used before. So we used goat, much to Eliza's disgust, because obviously we have our own goats and it was not our own goats. So we used goat, and then we used goat plus probiotics. So we used probio to try and boost in multi ways, but also that was one of the first things we added in. And she was very, very much in support of that. So she was very much like, that's a nice route. So she wanted us to go that route. So we used probio plus goat, and then we added our omega oils in, and then we added our skin supplement in, and then we added after that another protein and another protein and another protein. I've never added chicken back in, so I've never added chicken. She doesn't get chicken. I find it hard to source it well, and she never gets beef actually, so we don't give any beef. But again, that's just problem sourcing good beef and good chicken around here. And so she doesn't have those. But yeah, she was very quick to go first single source protein and then probiotic. What do you think, Amanda?
Oh, well, don't get me started on probiotics. You know where I am on that one. I love probiotics. I have been using probiotics for decades. Before it became a thing, back when I was raising parrots, probiotics saved my birds. And for me as well, you know, and definitely for my dogs, we have probio K9, which is one of my favorite supplements. Whenever whenever my dogs are going to be in a situation where they're stressed, so if we're going out on a long trip or if it's competition, not that I compete much, but Murphy has been known to get into agility once in a while. Um, both my dogs are way faster than me. So Lauren, I don't know how you do it with the agility world, but I've come to the conclusion I need slower sports like obedience
You're
and
so
rally.
funny.
But I feel like I'm getting old here. But anyways,
No.
but the probio helps to support them, and especially if you have a dog which is in stressy environments, because those microbes really, really benefit and they help to offset things. And we could get into a whole conversation about short chain fatty acids, because that is one of the things that the metabolic waste products of the probiotics that our dogs are consuming, and they have massive beneficial impacts. They help to feed the cells in the gut lining. There's a lot of research going on about the impact in the brain. So cool stuff. So absolutely, I think what you've done is brilliant, because you want to try and isolate what the actual problem is. What is the reaction towards supporting with probio? And of course, I'm a big fan of the omega-3s and the omega-6s, because they are like the foundation for a lot of fatty acid development, fatty acid use. Fatty acids are really important in our bodies. Our cells, the entire membrane that surrounds them, are composed of fatty acids. And so, and they're also, in the case of the omega-3s and the omega-6s, they can be very important as antioxidants. When you get into think about the immune response again. Part of the immune response involves a chemical pathway that results in something called free radicals, because the body's trying to fight something off. So it's basically taking heavy machinery and trying to shoot it up, right? But you get friendly fire. So our cells sometimes get damaged. We want to stop some of those chemical reactions before they harm us, right? We want to take out whatever the problem is. We don't want to harm us. That's what antioxidants do. And anti-inflammatories, like the words antioxidant and anti-inflammatories, the differences are, there are very detailed differences. I'm not going to go into them, but they both have massive benefits in helping to stymie and slow down that immune response against ourselves. So
brilliant, just brilliant. You're going to have to do this as a lesson for our pro dog trainers. I think they're going to love it. I think they're going to absolutely love it. And I think ultimately, itchy dogs, they stress us out, they stress themselves out, and they cause themselves more harm, which is a cycle of more stress, right? Like if you've got a dog that's constantly itching, it will irritate you. You'll be like, can you stop that? Can you stop that? Don't do that. And you'll be interrupting them just because you don't want them itchy. And then the dog itself is going to upset itself, and then the cycle they put themselves is upsetting. So all in all, let's help our dogs not itch, whether that's through the supplements in AO-Canine, whether that's through the learning and the enrichment, whether that's through the training and the gut and all of the things we do. Ultimately, there is only good to come of this podcast, and there's only good to come of the lesson that you have to create for our pro dog trainers, maybe even our games clubbers, I think too, Amanda, separate lessons for different audiences, because I just believe that everybody should know this. What do you think?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. These are the morsels of information that put our dogs together. And of course, dog training and dog ownership, they all go hand in hand with things like this. You can spend all of your time learning how to teach a behavior or play a game, but if you have a dog that is stressed and you're stressed because of it, it's going to be really hard to move forward. So these are these foundations, really important foundations. Yeah.
Well, it has been a pleasure. Literally, Amanda, immense knowledge in a very short time. I desperately want you to share it with our pro dog trainers, and I desperately want you to share it with our games clubbers. And absolutely loved having you. I hope we have you back real soon, because I know how much there is to hear sort of dispersed between the world. Thank you so much for joining us.
Well, thank you, Lauren, and it's always a joy talking with you. And you have this way of pulling out information that I tend to forget that I know. So I love sharing information with you and all of the game changes that are out there.
Absolutely amazing. Thank you, Amanda, for joining us. That was this week's episode of Sexier Squirrel Podcast. Join us next week where it gets a little bit interesting. I'll leave it on that, and we'll see you real soon. Make sure you share this podcast with your friends. We'll see you soon, Game Changers.